Emily's shoes squeaked on the ER floor as rain hammered the glass. She smelled antiseptic and panic. Nurse Kelly said, "Ma'am, this way." Emily saw Noah, 8, pale and still. Emily said, "Noah, Mommy's here." Dr. Harris said, "He isn't breathing on his own." The room shrank around her heart. Emily said, "Do whatever it takes." A monitor wailed like a siren inside her chest. Noah's freckles looked like faint stars. Emily said, "Please, please wake up." Dr. Harris said, "We're intubating now." The world blurred, then narrowed to her son's hand. Emily said, "Hold on, baby." Time broke into cold shards. The storm became a metronome outside, counting the seconds she could not hold. Emily said, "Mom, I can't lose him," but her phone went to voicemail. The waiting room smelled like old coffee and fear. A vending machine hummed like a lullaby for the desperate. Emily said, "He loves dinosaur pancakes." Her mind offered small facts to keep from drowning. A faded mural of balloons floated over cracked paint. Nurse Kelly said, "IQ is prepping." Emily nodded, afraid to breathe too deeply. The rain tapped the window like a patient hand. Emily said, "Please, let him wake up to morning cartoons." The registrar slid forms across a plastic clipboard, like a verdict. Emily said, "He's 8, Noah Carter," and her voice cracked on the number. Insurance questions marched without mercy. Emily said, "I'll figure it out." A clock clicked too loudly. She remembered the sticker he won at urgent care, proud as a medal. Dr. Harris said, "We stabilized him. He's in ICU." Relief and terror collided, throwing sparks inside her chest. Emily said, "Thank you," and the words felt small. The pen shook in her fingers as she signed her name like a promise. In the elevator, the floor numbers climbed like a slow prayer. Emily said, "Noah, you're brave," to the empty air. The doors opened to a hush that felt sacred and sharp. Machines whispered behind curtains. A volunteer offered tissues like a blessing. Emily said, "I'm fine," and tucked grief into her sleeve. Dr. Harris said, "You can hold his hand." The words made her knees weak. Her heart mapped every step to the ICU door. Emily said, "I'm still here," and the hallway carried the vow forward. Noah lay bathed in a halo of machines, but his lashes still cast shadows like home. Emily said, "Hey, astronaut," using the name he earned for courage. She traced air above his wrist, not daring to press. Dr. Harris said, "We watch for the next hours." The clock's second hand felt like a lighthouse. Emily said, "I'm not leaving," and settled on the narrow chair. The storm softened to a steady breath. She pictured a sunrise pouring through blinds. Emily said, "We'll see it together," and the words steadied her hands. The ICU hummed like a tired hive while Emily counted breaths she could not share. Emily said, "When you were 2, you slept on my chest," and memory warmed her cold hands. Dr. Harris said, "We watch and support him," and his voice steadied the room. Emily said, "You beat the flu dragon once, astronaut," and the beeps nodded along. She thought of rent due, and the second job that stole her sleep. Emily said, "I chose the exhaustion because you needed shoes that lit up." The storm softened, and the ceiling seemed higher. Emily said, "I am not afraid of the dark if you are here." Dr. Harris said, "Rest your eyes when you can," and she let one tear fall, like permission. Dawn in her memory cracked like an egg over a small skillet. Emily said, "Round or T-Rex," and Noah laughed, "T-Rex with extra teeth." The apartment kitchen smelled of coffee and cheap syrup. Emily said, "Someday we will see real rockets," and he lifted his fork like a countdown. The clock on the stove blinked 6:45 because she forgot the power outage. Emily said, "I work late so we can go to the museum," and he nodded like a solemn astronaut. Their window held a brave patch of sky. Emily said, "You are my best reason," and he whispered, "Promise we go Saturday." She sealed the promise with powdered sugar snow. The diner's bell rang like a metronome for stamina. Emily said, "Corner booth needs refills," and balanced 4 mugs like a prayer. Grease pop and jukebox croon braided the air. Maya said, "Text me any hour," and her smile carried scaffolding. Emily said, "I will trade my break for tips," and the manager shrugged without looking up. Boots ached, but rent kept time with the bell. Maya said, "You are allowed to need," and slid a granola bar into Emily's pocket. Emily said, "After this shift I clean offices," and the words tasted like grit and pride. The hospital chapel held a small, merciful quiet. Emily said, "If there is a ledger, I am overdrawn," and the wooden pew answered with a sigh. Stained color spilled across her hands like soft armor. Dr. Harris said, "Parents blame themselves when storms are just storms." Emily said, "I missed his cough between shifts, and guilt bit down hard." He said, "You brought him in time," and left space for her breath to expand. Emily said, "I need to be stronger than the fear," and the words felt like new bones. The silence agreed to hold them until she could. Back at Noah's bedside, the machines made a tired lullaby. Emily said, "Do you remember the kite at the pier?" And the memory unfolded like bright cloth. She saw him running, small legs flashing, wind pulling joy from the string. Emily said, "You yelled higher and strangers clapped without knowing why." She touched the blanket edge like it might lift. Emily said, "I promised more windy days," and the vow returned like tide. The storm outside gave one last sigh. Emily said, "I will trade my fear for patience," and settled into the chair to stand guard. The billing office felt colder than the ICU, with a printer that coughed like a judge. Ms. Patel said, "Your plan covers basics, not this level of respiratory care." Emily said, "Then tell me what to sell." A graph of charges rose like a storm front. "What?" Emily said, "He is 8, he builds paper rockets," and the number on the page did not blink. Her phone vibrated with rent, due, and a double shift request. The diner manager said, "Show up tonight or lose weekends." Emily said, "My son is fighting," and the hallway swallowed her voice. Ms. Patel said, "We can file hardship." Emily said, "File everything." The printer stopped, and the silence hit like a gavel. She folded the paper like it might turn into wings. The lobby smelled of rain and coffee when the past walked in wearing a pressed coat. Ethan said, "You look tired," like an insult wrapped in pity. Emily said, "Why are you here?" and her shoulders set like a brace. He said, "I can cover the hospital and the rent," and the words gleamed like bait. Emily said, "What is the hook?" He said, "Move back in and stop the night shifts. Do what I ask. No more chaos." His smile remembered old arguments. Emily said, "Control is not care." He gestured toward the elevators like a stage. Ethan said, "Decide fast, bills move faster." The automatic doors hissed, and the lobby felt smaller than her breath. Pharmacy glass reflected her worry back at her, like a mirror that charged admission. Clerk said, "The upgraded nebulizer isn't covered today." Emily said, "He needs it now," and hope thinned. She texted the diner because survival is timed like breakfast rush. The manager said, "No advances," and the clock smirked. Outside, Maya waited under a leaking awning. Maya said, "I can float you a little," and her eyes apologized for math. Emily said, "Keep it. I need you rested," but the words trembled. She counted quarters in her palm like prayers. Maya said, "You do not have to be heroic alone." The rain started again, soft and steady. In the consult room, the lab report spoke in codes that felt like whispers from a locked door. Dr. Harris said, "We saw elevated VOC exposure, likely from a household source." Emily said, "From what?" and the floor tilted. He said, "Cleaner, solvent, or a plug-in device," and slid the page forward. Memory flicked on like a harsh light. Ethan said, "I left a new air freshener. It will cover the damp," 2 weeks ago, smiling at control. Emily said, "Could that hurt him?" and the paper hummed with numbers. Dr. Harris said, "It could irritate inflamed lungs." Guilt rose like smoke. She pictured a cheap plastic rectangle glowing in a wall she could not unplug from her mind. The parking garage held the kind of echo that makes choices louder. Ethan said, "Sign tonight, and I wire funds," and the offer hung like a trap. Emily said, "He needs me to be brave, not owned." He stepped closer, cologne sharp as a rule. Ethan said, "You always confuse pride with care." Tires hissed on wet concrete, and a gull cried like a whistle. Maya said, "Back off," and her voice landed steady. Emily said, "Help means no strings," and her hands stopped shaking. Ethan said, "Bills do not wait." She said, "Neither does a backbone." His jaw tightened, and the echo swallowed his exit as the wind found her face. The restroom mirror threw her face back with the harsh honesty of tile and bleach. Emily said, "You should have seen the warning signs," and the faucet hissed like a jury. She remembered the plug-in's cheerful click. Emily said, "I smelled lavender and called it safety." The sting in her eyes was not so. Maya said, "Guilt is loud when you are tired," and offered a folded paper towel like a truce. Emily said, "If the air hurt him, then I failed." The hand dryer roared, then quit like a breath held too long. Emily said, "I will own it and fix it," and the words steadied her mouth. Outside, the corridor lights buzzed as if agreeing to witness. The apartment smelled like rain dragged through dust when the door swung wide. Maya said, "Point to anything that plugs or sprays," and flipped on the dim hall light. Emily said, "Bedroom first," and her chest tightened at the doorway. The plastic cube glowed a meek blue from the socket. Emily said, "Out," and wrapped it in a grocery bag like evidence. Under the sink, bottles crowded like rumors. Maya said, "Box the harsh ones and taped labels with steady hands." Emily said, "We will scrub the air with open windows and luck." The wind pushed the curtain, and the room felt almost breathable. Memory arrived uninvited, crisp as a receipt. Ethan said, "This will make the place smell respectable," and slid the plug-in into the wall like a signature. Emily said, "Respectable does not fix the leak," and he laughed too softly. Ethan said, "Details are my job, obedience is yours." The word landed like grit between teeth. Emily said, "Control is not help," but the room had held its breath for him. The present snapped back with the rustle of the bag. Emily said, "Your voice does not live here anymore." The socket sat empty like a small victory. Outside, sirens stitched the city into something awake. Back in the consult room, the air felt cleared by decision. Dr. Harris said, "You removed a likely irritant and that matters," and his tone placed weight where it belonged. Emily said, "I will file a report and change products." He nodded like a metronome set to hope. Maya said, "I will post a list on the fridge and check labels," and the plan built a spine. Emily said, "Fear still rattles, but action is louder." Dr. Harris said, "Guilt steals energy you need for care," and slid a resource sheet over. Emily said, "I will spend it on him and on rest." The monitors outside kept a steady, almost human rhythm. Night returned with a quieter kind of dark, the kind that lets promises breathe. Emily said, "I miss the danger, but I will not miss your tomorrow," and her thumbs traced the blanket seam. The room answered with gentle beeps like distant boys. Maya said, "I will take first watch if your eyes close," and set a thermos by the rail. Emily said, "I hear you, but I need to hear him," and leaned closer to Noah's soft breaths. Dr. Harris said, "Numbers look steadier, passing in a hush." Emily said, "I choose patience over panic," and the words felt earned. The window held a slice of moon that looked like a door cracking open. Morning cracked open with a weary light, and truth sat waiting on a clipboard. Dr. Harris said, "Our tech scanned the plug-in you bagged," and he set a report between them. Emily said, "What did you find?" while her pulse tapped. He said, "VOC levels spiked beyond household range." Maya said, "So it was not just fragrance," and her jaw set. Dr. Harris said, "Residue suggests solvent, not a standard refill." Emily said, "Someone swapped the wick," and the room tilted. He said, We cannot judge intent, but exposure fits the timeline. Emily said. Ethan installed it, and the words landed heavy. The page hummed like a warning siren that finally learned her name. In the apartment, cardboard sighed as they cleared the last shelf. Maya said, There's a receipt jammed behind the coats, and tugged it free. Emily said, Read it, but her eyes already knew. Maya said, Industrial deodorizer concentrate, Odorfix Pro, and the date stabbed. Emily said, He bought this the day he offered help, and her breath went thin. The coat still held Ethan's cologne like a signature. Emily said, He calls control a rescue, and heat rose in her ribs. Maya said, We document, then we decide. Emily slid the receipt into the evidence bag, and the air felt sharper, like a blade turned away. Back at the hospital, the hallway smelled like sanitizer and decision. Dr. Harris said, Correlation is strong, but we do not assign motive, and placed calm between panic and action. Emily said, I ignored my instinct because I was tired, and shame stung. Maya said, Fatigue is not consent, and the words steadied the floor. Dr. Harris said, You can file environmental and police reports, and slid forms over. Emily said, I will protect Noah and the next tired mother, and her voice rang. The monitor down the hall kept time like a drummer who believed in mercy. Emily signed her name with a hand that finally stopped shaking. The family lounge carried stale coffee and old magazines, perfect for confessions. Ethan said, You are spinning this, and his smile begged the room to agree. Emily said, You replace the cartridge with solvent and set the bag on the table. He said, It kills mold and stink, like a salesman to a jury. Emily said, It burned his lungs, and the syllables shook. Ethan said, You would have come back if the place felt clean, and regret never entered his eyes. Maya said, That is not care, that is a leash. He stepped closer. Emily said, You used my fear to move me. Silence answered, then he looked away. Security arrived with measured footsteps, and consequences found their chair. Emily said, I am filing charges, and the decision sat steady in her chest. Ethan said, You will ruin me, but the room did not flinch. Maya said, You chose this, and held her phone with a recorded echo of his words. Dr. Harris said, Focus on Noah. We will note the exposure, and the forms felt lighter. Ethan said, You need me, and the elevator chimed like a verdict. Emily said, I need boundaries and truth, and exhaled a weight she mistook for love. The doors closed on his reflection, and the day turned toward the next hard thing. Morning entered the ICU like a cautious guest, and the room held its breath with her. Dr. Harris said, We will attempt a spontaneous breathing trial, and set his gaze steady. Emily said, Tell me what strong looks like, and wrapped Noah's fingers with care. He said, You speak to him, we watch the numbers. Maya said, I am right here, and placed a thermos like a tiny lighthouse. Emily said, Hey astronaut, ride the air with me, and the beeps gathered into rhythm. Fear rose like a tide, but she built a wall from promises. Emily said, I will not let panic steer, and her voice found a clean edge. The ventilator clicked toward possibility, and time stretched thin, but held. The alarms broke the hush like birds startled from wire, and everyone moved without wasted breath. Dr. Harris said, Hold steady, adjusting support, and his hands were all certainty. Emily said, Noah, breathe with me, and counted like a tide. The numbers dipped, then hovered, then considered mercy. Maya said, You have him. Keep your voice where he can hear it, and her eyes anchored the moment. Emily said, In for stars, out for waves, and felt her fear loosen its grip. The ventilator sighed and the room sighed with it. Dr. Harris said, Good, he is tolerating, and the beeps softened. Emily said, You are not alone in this air, and the panic surrendered ground. Silence returned like a blanket warmed by use, and the monitor settled into a kinder song. Dr. Harris said, We will hold this level and watch, and stepped back to give hope room. Emily said, I have carried anger like armor, and felt its weight crack. She saw the plug-in, the receipts, the nights she blamed herself to stay awake. Maya said, "Let go without forgetting," and her voice placed a bridge over the dark. Emily said, "I forgive him to free us," and the words did not tremble. Noah's hand twitched, small as a sparrow's wing. Emily said, "That's you, I feel you," and tears arrived like gentle rain. Dr. Harris nodded, and the morning brightened by a shade. The family phone room was small enough to hear your own courage, and hers finally spoke first. Ethan said, "You overreacted like a habit he could not quit." Emily said, "I am done being smaller so your voice feels big and the words fit." He said, "You are punishing me," but the ceiling light did not blink. Emily said, "I forgive you so I can lift our days," and felt the chain fall. Ethan said, "You will need me," and the line thinned. Maya said, "Hang up when you are ready," and stood as a quiet border. Emily said, "Noah, and I will be safe without your rules," and pressed the button that sounded like a door unlocking. When she returned, the room felt taller, as if grief had stepped aside for something braver. Dr. Harris said, "We can try a brief reduction again," and his tone carried careful faith. Emily said, "I am here, Noah," and matched her breath to his. The numbers held like fingers interlaced. Maya said, "That's it," and the word was a candle. Emily said, "No debts in this air, only us," and the thought cleared space. Noah's lashes trembled, then settled, a promise without hurry. Dr. Harris said, "Good tolerance," and wrote hope in tidy strokes. Emily said, "Whatever tomorrow asks, I will answer," and felt the day choose her back. The ICU felt different, like the room had taken a deeper breath for them. Dr. Harris said, "If he holds these numbers, we can extubate late morning." Emily said, "Tell me how to help," and wrapped both hands around Noah's small fingers. Maya said, "I will handle calls and coffee," and set her phone to silent. Dr. Harris said, "Speak calm and steady. His body follows familiar voices." Emily said, "Hey astronaut, ride the gentle air with me." The monitor answered with a rhythm that no longer sounded like a cliff edge. Emily said, "I forgive the night, but we keep the lesson." Maya said, "We keep each other too." Dr. Harris said, "You brought him in time. Let that truth stay." The blinds spilled pale sun like a quiet drum roll for courage. Emily said, "Whatever happens, I am staying right here," and her shoulders finally lowered. The room held steady, as if approval had a shape and a pulse. The team moved like a practiced tide when the hour arrived. Dr. Harris said, "We will remove the tube on his exhale. Stay close." Emily said, "I am here, Noah," and matched her breath to his. The tape lifted, the clip released, and the moment thinned to a needle's width. Dr. Harris said, "Exhale now," and the tube slid free with a soft scrape. Noah coughed, small and fierce, and the room bent toward the sound. Emily said, "Easy in through your nose," and counted slow. Oxygen whispered through a cannula, and color touched his cheeks. Noah said, "Mom," hoarse as a paper edge, and hope flooded the floor. Maya said, "That's him," and pressed her fist to her mouth. Dr. Harris said, "Good work all of you," and reset the alarms to quiet. Afternoon settled, and the ward felt like a school hallway after the bell. Emily said, "Ice chips for champions," and lifted the spoon. Noah said, "Tastes like a tiny comet," and his freckles woke. Maya said, "I brought your paper rocket," and launched it from her palm. Emily said, "We will visit the museum when your lungs agree." Noah said, "Do they need tickets?" and almost smiled. Dr. Harris said, "We step up walking later, then rest," and noted the chart. Emily said, "I will trade hurry for steady steps," and tuck the blanket edge. Maya said, "I will fly the kite when you say go." Noah said, "Make it blue like the sky," and sleep tugged him grateful. The window held a clean square of day that looked like permission. In the hospital garden, wind combed the hedges like a careful hand. Dr. Harris said, "Discharge depends on one quiet night and clear labs." Emily said, "We can do quiet," and steadied the wheelchair with care. Maya said, I posted the home checklist on the fridge and exhaled. Noah said, "Can the kite see the moon from here?" and watched a cloud break. Emily said, "Soon from the pier," and the word soon felt trustworthy. Dr. Harris said, "Call for any tightness, do not wait," and his eyes were kind. Emily said, "Thank you for the way you listen," and meant every syllable. Maya said, "We build new air at home," and tapped her heart. The light warmed toward gold, and the day held without wobbling. Night found them back in the apartment, windows open to a careful breeze. The plug-in was gone, the socket looked like a healed scar. Emily said, "You are safe," and watched Noah sleep under a clean quilt. Maya said, "Text if the night grows teeth," and closed the door to leave them. The fridge hummed beside a list that looked like a promise. Emily said, "You were braver than the worst day," and brushed his hair back. The streetlight painted the wall like a slow tide. Noah sighed once and drifted deeper. Emily said, "I would do it all again, for you I would," and the words landed soft but unbreakable. The room listened, then answered with quiet, and the story settled into the kind of silence that holds love.